Welcome to this evening's TI Technology webinar hosted by Texas Instruments, where we'll see how TI-Nspire can support your transition to the new TEKS standards for grade 8. Thanks everyone for joining us tonight, and we'd like to offer a special welcome if this is your first T-Cubed professional development webinar. My name is Eric Butterbaugh, and I'm the PD Curriculum Coordinator for Texas Instruments. I work with educators across North America to develop TI's wide range of professional development workshops. Mike Houston is the moderator for our PD webinar series, and he'll be joining us shortly. I'm very happy to introduce tonight's panelists. We have Toni Norrell and Michelle Rinehart. With over 25 years of teaching experience from elementary school up to college, Toni is currently a math specialist and T-Cubed regional instructor in Corpus Christi, Texas. In 2007, Toni received the Presidential Award for Excellence in Mathematics and Science Teaching. Thanks for being with us, Toni.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
We're also joined by Michelle Rinehart. Michelle has taught high school math and science in rural districts across Texas, while also working as a math and science consultant. A frequent presenter at state and international conferences, Michelle was recently a finalist for the TCEA Teacher of the Year Award. Thanks for being with us, Michelle.
Delighted to be here. Thanks, Eric.
We're expecting a large crowd, so your audio is muted. Please send questions to all panelists using the Q&A window on the right side of your screen. We'll also send general messages using the chat window. Once we move to the teacher software, which will be in a couple of minutes, you can access the Q&A and chat windows by clicking the appropriate icons on the floating toolbar at the top of your screen. This session is being recorded, and we'll provide a link to the certificate of attendance at the end of the event. Within a day or two, we'll also send up a follow-up email with a link to the recording and a link to the certificate of attendance. So if you don't get it at the end of the webinar, it will be in your inbox in about a day or two. We don't expect that you'll have any audio issues tonight, but if you do get disconnected, you can rejoin the audio conference by either going to the audio or communicate menus and selecting audio broadcast. And at this point, Toni is going to talk about tonight's agenda.
Thank you, Eric. So we did our welcome and introductions, and we're going to be doing an overview of TI-Nspire applications. We're going to spend some time looking at linear modeling with multiple representations, as well as some things you can do with the calculator application. And if time allows, we're going to look at a brand new standard in 8th grade, which is the mean absolute deviation. And then we would like to wrap up with a math-inspired activity on solving systems graphically.
Great, thanks, Toni. Here are our expected outcomes from tonight's 1-hour webinar. So we're really going to be looking at a lot of the features from the Nspire CX. But we're going to be looking at those through the lens of the new 8th grade TEKS, or Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. So Toni and I have gone through and picked out either some brand new standards to 8th grade or some standards that have been there for a while, but now have some new approaches now that calculators are a possibility. Also, we'll look at all kinds of things you can do with the Nspire, from basic calculations, graphing functions, scatter plots. But don't worry, we'll also leave you with a number of resources for kind of going further, exploring next steps, or to revisit some of the things that we looked at tonight. So that's kind of an overview of where we're going in this webinar.
Great. And as Michelle shares her desktop, we just wanted to remind you that the Q&A and chat panels are accessible by hovering your cursor over the green tab at the top of your screen And I believe the Q&A panel, if it's not visible, go to it looks like the eject button all the way to the right, and there might be some additional options there. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, Eric. And we encourage you to, everyone attending, to make this session as interactive as possible. We have lots of places for y'all to ask questions, but please feel free to ask questions in the chat or in the Q&A features really throughout the webinar. We've planned time to kind of diverge and go different places that you're interested in. So please customize this webinar, ask all kinds of questions. Toni will kind of be manning the chat and then kind of being the voice for your questions. So please feel free to use that. So right now you should be seeing my desktop, and on my desktop I have the TI-Nspire teacher software open. And so this is a really powerful software and an awesome teaching tool. So over on the left-hand side of my screen, you kind of see the keypad from the TI-Nspire. And so I can actually push buttons on this keypad like I would on the physical handheld. And then you'll see the screen, instead of sitting up top like it would on the handheld, is projected over here on the right, nice and big, kind of for classroom use. So this is a great instructional tool, but also a great way for us to kind of explore some of the functionality today in this webinar. Now you'll also notice that I can interact with the document right here on the right-hand side, but I'm really going to try to drive this session from the keypad itself over on the left-hand side to really mimic the buttons that we would be pushing and how we'd be making that work. So you can kind of follow along with that. You'll notice the buttons light up red as I click on different things. But again, don't feel like you have to memorize all these actions. There's lots of other resources we'll share with you and lots of great training coming up this summer that will really immerse you in this.
Michelle, I love the way buttons light up when you push them, because it makes it much easier for the students to follow along when they're following along with me in class.
Absolutely, absolutely. I really love this as an instructional tool for sure. So we're going to go ahead, and you'll notice across the top of this document it has a number of little pages. And the easiest way to change the pages on the handheld is using this little button right here. You'll see in this light blue, and it's a page turning to the right. So to activate that, I'm going to push the light blue control key and then the right arrow, and that will move me to the right one page. So that brings us to our first standard that we selected, and this is a brand new standard for 8th grade coming kind of down from Algebra 1. I'll give you a little bit of time to read that one. And there are so many things that can be done with this standard using all these different representations. And so we're really just going to take one problem and look at one way that we can build these multiple representations using the software. So moving on to the next page, you'll see I went Control, right arrow again. Now I'm on page 1.3, and this is a problem that we've kind of pulled to look at that could be modeled by a linear situation. So take a minute, just kind of read through it, get a feel for what's going on here, and then we'll build some different representations of this data. So when we read through this question, some of you may have just instinctively kind of written an equation in your mind, and you already know what we're going to kind of solve, and you have an idea of what it's going to be. We're going to really look at this from a basics approach in terms of what if students really aren't there yet, how can they build up to that? So we're going to start by maybe having our students think about how much would it cost for just 1 hour or for 2 hours, and then what about 3, and kind of building a pattern from there. And so the first thing we're going to have our students do is maybe build a table. And so we're going to model how that can be done using the Nspire. So I don't have, my next page is not part of this question, so I can actually add pages and make this a living document. So to do that, right above my doc button, you'll see a plus page written in light blue. So I can do Control Doc to add a page. And right away it pops up with these 7 options. So these are the 7 applications that are available within the Nspire. And we could add any of these pages and multiples of all of them. For our purposes today, we're going to look at the calculator page in a little while. We'll also look at the graphs page in a little while. We'll also look at lists and spreadsheets. Those are the three we're really going to focus on today. But as you can see, there are others, and they all do really powerful things. So for starters, since we're just kind of creating a table, we're going to start by adding a list and spreadsheets page. So I'll click on that. And you'll notice right away that it added a new page, 1.4, and now we have this spreadsheet that we can move our cursor, we can kind of cursor around in, we can enter data, we can enter terms, all kinds of stuff like that.
And I don't think it's Michelle, that this page looks a lot like an Excel page.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we're going to see in a minute, it acts a lot like one too. So we have kind of some cells down here where we can enter data, but for right now, we're going to go up to the top of our spreadsheet and kind of treat this like a table, like a T table or an X and Y table, where we're going to establish some variables and then enter some data. So for our problem situation, we're kind of looking at the number of hours and then how much it would cost. So if I move up into this top cell, I could just use variables like L1 for list 1 or X and Y. One of the things that we love about the Nspire is that you can really use the variables that represent your problem. So I could go down here to the bottom of my keypad and actually type in hours and push enter. And so now I've titled this column hours. Likewise, I'll go over to the top of this next column, and our other variable was cost, I believe. And push enter there. And so we'll see why that's handy here in a few minutes, but then we can begin to build the table with our students. So we might say, okay, well, how much would it cost for 1 hour of lawn cutting? And they would have that $12 equipment fee plus the $8 per hour, so that one would be $20. Now, feel free to correct me if I make any mistakes here. For 2 hours, it would cost an additional $8, so we could do just $28. Moving around throughout the cells, 3 hours. Let's say we'll go as far as 4 hours. Now, Toni mentioned a minute ago that it kind of looks a lot like Excel, and it really does. And it also has a lot of that same functionality. So I can enter these numbers as I have them, just kind of doing the math in my head. But I can also ask the spreadsheet to do a computation if it was something more difficult or I just wanted to check. So to do that, I would start by pushing the Enter key, which is over here under Control, and then just typing in my computation. That's kind of a handy feature as well. So now I have my data put in, kind of created a table. So what can I do with it? So this is where things get really kind of fun.
I'd like to see
Go for it. So you're saying you want to see me graph it?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so we're going to look at a number of different ways to display this data, because right now it's just in table form, but even within this table form, we can do a graph really quickly. So one of my favorite buttons, because it's kind of where everything lives on the Nspire, is the menu button. So I'm going to push the menu button, and you'll notice that the Nspire is kind of set up like a computer where you've got these menus and sub-menus where you can look at all your different options. So for example, I've got all these action options, insert, this data, statistics, all kinds of stuff. But right now, I'm just going to go to the data menu, and I want to do number 9, a quick graph. I just want to be able to drop of a hat, see what this data is going to look like. So let me go to that one again. So I just selected number 9 for quick graph. And you'll notice over here that I now have a graph with hours on the bottom. And we're going to talk in a minute about how it knew that I wanted hours as my independent variable. But you'll notice there isn't a dependent variable yet. But there are instructions for me to click there. So I can click there, and right away it brings up the 2 variables that I've used so far. And so this is one of the reasons why I love being able to name your variables the actual situation, like cost and hours, so that when I select cost, it will now create a graph of cost versus hours and have those axes labeled as well. Toni, why don't you talk a little bit about the quick graph and how it knew to do hours as the independent variable there.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. So when I first started creating quick graphs, because I thought they were so cool, I couldn't quite figure out, sometimes it would put the variable that I wanted down on the horizontal axis, and sometimes it wouldn't. And I kept wondering why it made the choices that it did. And I finally figured out that it depended on where my cursor was located when I chose the quick graph. So you were in the cell that you're in right now under the hours column, and so it knew to put the hours down as your horizontal axis. So if you had been where cost is, like you are right now when you did quick graph, then it would think that you wanted cost to be your horizontal axis.
And that's just a slick little thing that same thing, I never knew why it did it one way or the other. I was kind of wondered. But one thing that's also neat about this is, so say you were in the wrong cell and you thought, oh, man, I really wanted that to be hours down there. Everything is dynamic. So I can click where it says cost, and it will prompt me, oh, did you really want hours here? And I can just change it over. And then I can go back and get my costs here. So that's kind of a slick way of doing that. Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Toni. So before we move on, we want to talk about, or want to give y'all a chance to talk about what you like or what you don't like about this setup. So we have kind of the table over on the left, and then we just did a quick graph. This is not the only way to graph the data. It's just a really quick way. But we want to give you a chance to type into the chat either a pro, something you like about what you're seeing here, or a con, something that, you know, you kind of wish was a little bit different about it maybe, about seeing the list and the quick graph on the same page. So if you'll take a minute and kind of go over to the chat menu, to the chat box, and maybe type in either a pro or a con of this setup and send it to all participants. We'll kind of see what some of your thoughts are on this setup.
And Michelle, while they're thinking about that and typing in the chat, we have a question, and that is,
okay.
How do we move a cursor so freely on the calculator screen like you're doing on the software?
That is a great question. So first of all, as we talked about earlier, I can run the program from the right side of this software, as you're seeing here. But on the handheld, you would actually use this area of the handheld. And so you'll be able to watch my cursor. Oh, no, so I won't move there because it really won't run it that way from the, let me see if I can leave it over here. You can actually move your cursor around. This part of the handheld is actually like a touch-sensitive mouse, like on a laptop. And so you can kind of just move your hand across this your finger across this entire space, and it will move your mouse icon around this screen.
So Michelle, we have a couple of comments. We have that multiple representations is always valuable for students, and that's one of the things I like about this as well, that you can see the table and the graph at the same time. Especially, you and I have talked about this, what if you had made an error in one of those calculations that you made in the cost column?
Oh, I like that. So say I've been doing my math really quickly and I just said that this was 34 or something, okay, or even 32. You'll notice that everything is dynamically linked. So as I make a change on the left side, it makes an automatic change on the right side, which is really handy too because we do all make mistakes, and that way we can correct them really quickly and see also like how different parameter changes affect these different representations.
Nice. We had another comment. It makes graphing so much easier, especially labeling the independent and dependent variables. That's one of my favorite things as well.
Yeah. Awesome. So we're seeing lots of great comments in the chat. Please feel free to continue those conversations, to respond to each other, even to all participants, and also ask questions or other things you're wondering about as we're going through. Hey, is it possible to do this? Or what happens if? This is kind of your time to explore this with us. So, okay, let's go ahead and move on. And Toni, just feel free to keep sharing different things and questions and all that kind of stuff.
So I'm wondering, Michelle, yeah. What if I need more room? What if I want to see a bigger scatter plot?
Love that. So I love how quick graph is, but then part of me wants so much more room over here. And so that's what we're going to look at next is another way to create a graph like this. The other thing that I love about the Nspire is that there are 5 or 6 different ways to do any given thing. And so you don't necessarily need to know all 5 or 6, but your students will discover a lot of them, and they might have different favorites. So even Toni and I have different favorite ways to do a lot of the things we're looking at today. So we're going to look at how we could take this data and graph it on a brand new page, maybe even just a graph page. So again, we're going to want to add a new page to our document. So I'll go back to my handheld, and here's my little plus page that I'm shooting for. So I'll go Control Doc, and again, I've got my 7 options. I don't need to make another list. I've already entered that data, and the handheld is storing it and taking good care of it. Instead, I'm going to go up and add a graph page. So you'll notice as soon as I do that, that a function entry line comes up. And so it's got f1 at x or f at x notation, function notation, ready for me to graph something like 2x plus 1 or x squared or something like that. But we don't really want to graph a function yet. We don't know what function is going to model this data yet. Instead, I want to graph a scatter plot. So we're going to look at how we can change that. Again, my favorite button on the handheld is the menu button because everything is kind of stored in there. So when I click on menu, you'll notice that now that we're on a graphs page, we have different options, things we didn't see before, which kind of makes sense. Like this option down here, window zoom, that wouldn't have made sense on a list page per se. But going back to the options we do have, we want to change the graph entry line. Currently, it's set up to receive a function, option number 1. But we want to do a scatter plot where we have x values and y values, and we want to enter those instead. So I'm just going to click number 5 for scatter plot. And you'll notice that my function or my graph entry line has now changed, S1 for scatter plot, and wants to know what do I want in my x's and what do I want in my y's. So a couple ways to do this. One way is, I don't really remember what I called those, but thankfully there's this handy button right here called vars, for variables. So when I click on the var button, it will prompt me, oh, here are the things, here are the variables that you set up. You had cost and hours from that list. So I think we wanted hours for our x variable. And so now that one's entered. But another way you can enter variables, and a lot of kids like this because they're pretty fast at this, is you can actually just type it in if you know the name of it. So our y variable was cost. So I'm going to use the keypad at the bottom. And you'll notice that as soon as I push the T for cost, it boldens, I don't know if that's a word, but we'll say it is, as if to kind of signify that that is a stored variable, that it's recognizing that as a variable. So now we're all set. We have our hours for our x values and our cost for our y values. We'll just push enter. Push that over here. And this is when my kids would say to me, it's broken. It's broken, it's not working, it's not showing the graph. But think about what our data was. I'm going to go back a page. 120, 228, 336. When we did the quick graph, it automatically resized the graph for us. But on our graph page, we're only going from -10 to 10 and from -7-ish to about 7-ish. So we need to change our window. Okay, some thoughts there. Again, menu, best place to start because pretty much everything is stored in there. As soon as we push menu, we see some promising options, not the least of which is number 4, window zoom. Within this, lots of options. We could just do a zoom out if we wanted to, but I really want to kind of take control of the window settings and only go from certain values to other certain values. So let's go up and do the window settings specifically. You'll see that when we do that, we can control everything, the minimum value on the x's, the max. So I think we want to maybe start at -1, just so we have that axis on there. Max value, I guess 10's okay. X scale is asking what do you want your x's to go over by, and I always love to give this a specific number so it doesn't choose something random. So I'll say 1. Our y min, let's do -1 again, just so we have that axis. Y max, I don't know, maybe 60. And Y scale, maybe those can go up by 5. So this is also a great conversation to have with students, and this is another reason we love to use window settings, because it has them think about, well, what did our data say? What our lowest X have been? What would our greatest Y have been? What should we go up by? It's like you're setting up a scatter plot on blank graph paper. Then I'll push OK.
Very nice. I love the ordered pair.
Yes, the hours, comma, cost, kind of giving us some context to these points. 1, 20 means 1 hour, 20 cost, $20 of cost. So there are my 4 points that I had from before. And now we can see them, so it wasn't really broken, as my kids would always tell me. And now that we kind of have this, or now that we're here, we may want to talk about, okay, this looks pretty linear, like we could draw a straight line through there. Let's go ahead and come up with one that would map that really nicely. So now we want to start by maybe graphing a line and then changing it around a bit until it really goes through these points nicely. You'll notice that our function line, which we started with, it was showing when we first added this graph page, it's gone now. So I can go get it, though, through the menu. And go Menu, Graph Entry Edit, and ask me, well, what kind do you want? Do you want to do another scatter plot? Not in this case. I really do want to do a function. I want to kind of graph y equals x and then play around with it a little bit. So I'm going to click on Function, and then there my function line is again. So you can always go get it from the menu. We're just going to graph f at x equals x, the linear parent function. We'll notice that that does not model our data very well yet. And so we're going to kind of move this function around until it does model it a little bit better. So a couple things to notice. When I hover over this line, kind of near the middle of the line, I get a 4-way arrow, also known as the translation tool. When I hover over one of the ends of the line, I get a different kind of symbol, this back and forth arrow or a rotation tool. And so what I'll do is I will click with the rotation tool, and I'm going to rotate this line until it looks like it would be a better fit for that data. Maybe around there. And you notice that as I was rotating it, that equation was changing as well. So all of these elements are dynamically linked. A change on one reflects a change on the other. So it's a great way to just explore what that number, what that coefficient from the x does and what it means. Then, instead of doing the rotation tool, I'm kind of near the middle of the line and I grab the translation tool, I can move this whole line up and down. And again, as I'm doing that, you're noticing changes in the equation. I'm going to move it till it kind of models that data really nicely.
So, Michelle, is there a way to change the f of x to y equals if I prefer that?
That's a great question, because the standard we looked at for 8th grade was about using the form y equals mx plus b. And we really don't see function notation until we get into Algebra 1 specifically. So really you can change almost anything on these files. As I hover over the line, I'm going to right-click. Now on the computer, I am physically right-clicking. But on the handheld, I would actually push Control and then Menu, and it brings up this little context menu. So depending on what you're hovering over, you'll get different menus. So again, I'm going to hover over this line, right-click, and these are all the things I can do. I'm going to change the attributes here in a minute, but I could also change the color, which I love. So I'm going to change this line color to red just because it makes me happy. And then I'll go back over the line, right-click. Again, that's Control Menu if you're using the handheld, and go to Attributes. And inside Attributes, I've got all these options. My first one is Line Weight, so I can right or left arrow to change the thickness. The next one is Style, so like continuous, dotted. But then this third one is exactly what you were asking about, Toni. What's the label style look like? So right now I have f at x notation, but I can change it to y equals notation if that's a better fit for what we're looking at. Okay. Also, this is where we could kind of make connections back to the question, like 7.95x plus 11.8, are those the numbers it should really be? Maybe it should have been 8x plus 12, you know, just so that it really matches the question. But everything's dynamic, so I could double click here. It'll bring up the equation for me, and I could just go in and make those changes. And then we'll see it matches those points perfectly. But if we wanted to check and see if it really matches those points, maybe I just want a table from this line. I just want to really see that this line goes through those points in a table form. So we can do that on the same page. And let's again go to menu where everything's probably hidden somewhere. And when we click on menu, we'll see that one of the options is 7 for table. Another thing I love about the setup of the Nspire is if ever there is a shortcut, if you're a shortcut kind of person, Control-C to copy, Control-V to paste, it will show you right in the menu. So the first time you go in, you might say, oh, split screen table, I could go through the menu. Or I could do Control-T in the future. So that's good to know. I'm going to click there, and then just like that, here is a table of values for my function, for my 8x plus 12, that I can check out and see if the points really match what we were thinking about before. 1 hour, $20, 2 hours, $28, etc. And if I wanted to hide this table, I could use that same shortcut. Control and then T on my handheld will toggle the table on and off. So I love that functionality. Okay.
So we want to know the answer to the question, right?
Yes. So way back here, we actually asked a question about the total charge to have a city park mode was $72. So how many hours is that? So we can go back to our table. Again, I turned it off, but I can turn it on Control-T or through the menu. And we're looking for a cost of $72. And we don't have it. But our table is going to show us that it's somewhere in between the 7 and 8 hour mark. And so we could change our table settings to look more specifically. We could also investigate it maybe on the graph. So we're going to look at just kind of the graphical method here, because then we're going to move on to some calculator page stuff. So let me turn my table off for just a second. What I really want to do is I want to be able to scroll up to where it says 72 and just kind of see where my function is. You'll see that I had to change my window settings. I didn't do a good job of going high enough. But another thing, I love this, my kids love this, is because this page is dynamic, they can use their mouse. And again, they could use the touchpad to turn it on to move their mouse around. You can actually just double click here where it says 60, and it's editable. Again, not sure if that's a word. And they can just type in 80, and then just like that, it resizes and jumps up to 80, which I love.
So I can do that instead of going to the window settings?
That's exactly right. You can actually click on each of these and change each window setting, or you can do them all at once by going Menu, Window Zoom, Window Settings. Yes, ma'am.
Great.
Well, while we're in the menu, instead of using the table to solve this, we can also kind of trace along the graph and kind of get an idea of where it reaches 72. So if we go to Trace, Graph Trace, this is a little bit subtle at first, but as soon as I did that, up in the upper left, this little icon came up. And it's telling me that I'm in a tool, or I have a tool open, and that tool is Graph Trace. So when I mouse over Graph Trace, it actually gives me the instructions on how to use it, which is great. So it tells me I can move left or right using the cursor, and I can actually enter a number to jump to it. So we're going to look at what that looks like in just a second. So I'm on the red function now. You'll notice my cursor is red, and I can move left and right and kind of move along this function. And you'll notice in the bottom right, it gives me the coordinates for the point that I'm on my function. So I'm just arrowing right. I'm trying to get to my cost value of 72. Oh,
yay.
Awesome. I hit it exactly. So then, yeah, now we can see that it's 7.5 hours would be 72. If I didn't get quite there, like say it was taking me to 7.4 and I couldn't land quite on the spot I wanted to check out, you can also just type in numbers. So I could type in 7.5, and as soon as I started typing those numbers, it popped up X equals. And then we'll push Enter, and my cursor will jump to that point and give me the coordinates down the bottom. So that's another really handy tool there.
Hey, Michelle.
So, yes.
Sorry to interrupt. This is Mike Houston. We had a question from Linda. She asked how you got the trace function. Could you just go over that one more time?
Absolutely. And let me do one thing on the way there, which is right now I have my trace function turned on, but I can't do some of the things I want to do. Like, it really stresses me out that this function equation is right on top of that line, but I can't grab it. So when you're in a tool and you want to turn it off, you can just push the escape key to get out of it. And when I push escape, you'll notice that my little icon went away, but also my cursor went away that was tracing along, so now I can move that. So how to get back into the trace tool, everything's in the menu. So I'll just push menu. And as soon as I push menu, there's usually going to be a submenu that will kind of direct me there. So here we see the trace submenu. And then within that, we have lots of different options, but all we wanted to do was trace the graph. So we just want that very first option, 1 for graph trace. And as soon as we select that, now my trace tool is back on. You can see the icon in the upper left. And then here's my cursor that I can trace with and the coordinates in the bottom. Great question. Okay. Toni, other questions or thoughts, comments you want to add before we move on to calculators?
No, just I think we could look at the other thing is if we look at the table and say if we had 8 hours, what would it cost? So we could look at the other side of the problem as well.
Oh, perfect. That's a great thing. So I just turned on my table by doing Control-T. I love those shortcuts. Some people love to go through the menu every time. Not a problem. Either way, probably lots of other ways too. But you could scroll down to a specific number of hours and then look over at the specific cost. You're right. So you can go kind of those directions on the table. Awesome.
Michelle, can you do one more thing for me? I apologize.
Sure.
We had a question earlier. Whenever you were back on your quick graph that you did initially.
Sure.
We had a couple people that wanted the x-axis to be integers or to match the hours that you had in that column. How do you change those values?
Great question. So a couple ways to do that. Again, the page is dynamic, so you'll see that once I arrow over this axis, I actually get a tool where I can just grab that axis and change it like that, which is kind of handy. But it is automatically resizing. I still don't have control over what increments it uses. I can do that on the vertical axis here as well if I really wanted to have 0, 0 on there per se. Another way, though, is when I've got the right side of the page highlighted, you can see there's a thicker black box around that side of the screen. Now when I push menu, my 5th option here is window zoom. And so, again, we have window settings, which makes sense for that specific graph. Then I can push enter on window settings, and I can choose my min, max, ymin, ymax. You don't have the scale options like you do on the graph, so you don't have quite as much control on the quick graph as you would on a full graphs page, and that's why we want to show kind of both options. Great question. Okay, before we move on to our pre-made activity, we want to look at some calculations you might do in 8th grade. So I'm going to add a new page to our document. Control Doc, we'll use that plus page option. And this time we're just going to choose option number 1, add a calculator page. So nothing fancy yet. We're going to pause here and we want to give y'all a chance to type into the chat, just share with us what are some calculations that you and your students do right now in 8th grade or that you think you would do next year, because we're going to share what those would look like on the Nspire screen. So take a minute and share a calculation or two that's kind of typical of the work you do or the work that you will be doing next year.
Michelle, while we're waiting for people to type in some questions and some thoughts, I'd like to see some fractions using a template.
Okay, let's see about that. So
and I just want to jump in, if I could. We have a lot of people that are giving some great responses, but they're sending their chats to me as the host. And so I don't think Michelle or Toni that you guys are able to see that. So just a quick reminder, if you're going to use the chat window, the best thing to send to would be all participants. And that way everyone can see it.
Use that drop down. Awesome. Perfect. Great. Mike, do you have some of those you want to share with us too? Because we'll model them for everyone to see.
Yeah. Roxana was talking about the Pythagorean theorem.
Oh, good one.
And then Linda said all operations with rational numbers.
Okay. Awesome. Let's start with some of those. And again, please still feel free to share some others, y'all, and then we'll add on. So Pythagorean theorem. So say we started with two numbers that are the two legs. And then we'll use two that maybe won't work out nicely. And so we're going to do maybe 5 squared plus 6 squared and then have to square root it. So we can type in our numbers, and then we just have to kind of find the key we're looking for. And we're going to see x squared over here to the left of the 4. So we can do 5 squared plus 6 squared equals. And then I can square root now. I could have also started with the square root symbol before. But the square root is right above the x squared, but in light blue. So I'll control x squared to turn that on. Now I can type in 61. But another thing I really like is the ability to use my history. So if instead I push the up arrow on my keypad, you'll notice that I can scroll through my previous options. And so once it's highlighted in blue, I can push enter, and it will bring that entry down to wherever I was in that computation, and then push enter, and it will give me a decimal approximation. Rational numbers and operations with those. Toni, you were asking about this as well. One of my favorite things about the Nspire is this button right here. Right above the division symbol is a fraction template in blue. So if I push Control Divide, it brings up a fraction template ready for me to kind of enter some numbers into, which I love. So that way it looks like what students are seeing on the screen, on their paper. So if I do Control Divide to get another fraction template, I could enter that one in here. That's not a good one to add together. Something like this. And we'll notice that it will also give us that answer in fractional form.
Michelle?
Yes, ma'am.
Erica was asking, how do you change fractions to decimals or decimals to fractions?
Great question. So say I didn't want, say 11/15 doesn't make any sense to me, and I wonder what that is as a decimal. Couple of ways you can do that.
Hey, why did it give it to you as 11/15 to begin with? Why did it give you that answer as a fraction?
That's a great question. And maybe instead, I mean, maybe 1/3 is not the best way to write this, but say I had 0.33 and I was adding 0.4, so I'm kind of working this one in decimals. Now I push enter. Notice that it gives me the answer in decimals. So it's basing its answer on, its output, I should say, on your specific input. But is there a way that I could have entered it as fractions and got the answer as decimals? And the answer is yes. So I'm going to, instead of retyping this, I'm going to use my up arrow, my little history scroller here, and scroll up until it's highlighted, and then push enter to bring that computation down. And then right above this enter key, I know that if I push enter right now, it's going to do 11/15. Right above this enter key, though, is the approximation symbol. So if instead of pressing enter, I push control enter, it will change it to the decimal approximation. It will give me an approximation of that answer. Other thoughts, other things we're wondering about?
We're getting a lot of comments. Can we look at how we would do slope?
Oh, that's a great one. Yeah, so one of the new standards, and we've got this one pulled up as well, is about using similar right triangles to develop an understanding of slope, but also being able to use this slope equation that we see here to do some computations. And so we've kind of come up with 2 potential points using integers, which some students, it just kind of freaks them out. And we're going to look at how we could do that on a calculator page. So I'm going to add a new calculator page, Control Doc to add a page. I want another calculator page. And we're just going to do a slope calculation. And we have some students who, if they were doing a slope calculation, would just kind of type it in. Sorry, I got to remember to use over here. So maybe and I'll show this two different ways, and it'll kind of make sense why I'm typing it this way. But say this is their y2 minus their y1 divided by their x2 minus their x1. And in their mind, that's a stacked fraction. But the calculator is going to compute that using order of operations. Well, that's not what I meant at all. And so that's why the stacked fractions or the fraction template is so handy in the Nspire. So instead, I could just do Control Divide to get my fraction template. And now I'm going to enter my numerator. -3, it's my y2, minus -6, divided by 5 minus -1. And notice also the different notation between the negative symbol, so like negation, and the minus symbol, and how those are represented differently. Now when I push enter, I know that I really have computed my correct numerator and correct denominator because of the way that that stacked fraction looks like what I had written on paper. Other thoughts? Okay,
Michelle,
we
at
yes,
ordering numbers. Can we look at ordering? Yeah, ordering rational numbers.
Love this. And so this is not a new standard to 8th grade at all. But now that we have calculator functionality, there are going to be some different ways, definitely that students can check their work that they've been reasoning in their heads. So we want to show you something we think is super cool for kind of ordering rational numbers. I'm going to add another calculator page, so Control-Doc to add a page, and we want a calculator page. And so say we started with the fraction 18/25. So I'm going to get a template, type in my 18/25. Say I want that as a decimal. I did Control-Enter there to get the approximation. And then say we wanted to compare that to 3/4. This time I'm not going to use a fraction template. I'm just going to type 3/4, Control-Enter. Notice that it puts it in a fraction template for me. And then there's my approximation. So I can always just change these fractions into decimals and compare them that way. But another thing we love, this is kind of handy, is that we can actually compare these fractions in a little inequality statement. So I just push the up arrow to go get my previous entry and push Enter to bring it down. And I'm thinking that this fraction is less than 3/4. So I'm going to push Control equals, because right above equals, I have all kinds of little symbols here that I want to access. So Control equals brings up all of my inequality symbols here. And I think that 18/25 is less than 3/4. When I push Enter, it tells me that that's true. And so you can actually check some of your inequality statements here. Now, did we just luck out, or, you know, is it really checking these? Oops, totally not what I wanted to do, sorry. Go back up to my statement, pull it down. This time I'm going to change that symbol to greater than. Is 18/25 greater than 3/4? Enter, that's false. And so you can actually check your statements that way. One last thing we thought was super cool is, okay, can you check multiple statements? Like, can we check and see if 18/25 is less than 3/4, is less than 5/6? Wouldn't this be awesome if this worked? And sure enough, it does. So I thought that's kind of a neat way to be able to check those different orders of ordering those rational numbers.
Michelle, I think we're starting to run out of time, and so I wanted to get to looking at solving systems by graphing, if we can.
Sure. So the other activity we wanted to share, and this is a file that you'll also receive by email. This is a pre-made file, which we did not make, which someone much smarter than me made and shared online for free, which I love. And so there's this great place that you really need to check out sometime called Math Inspired. And on the Math Inspired site, you'll find all kinds of pre-made activities sorted by course, sorted by topic. They're awesome. You can download the activity, download student notes, see an activity for it, teacher notes, the answers, all that kind of stuff. So back in the software, we've downloaded the file, and this is the actual file that they'll interact with. And students can grab this point and kind of drag it across, and what we're looking at here is a graphical interpretation of solutions to systems, which is also a new standard in 8th grade. And so there's specific instructions that are provided on the student activity, which looks like this, where it moves, it kind of guides students through, moves the points at x equals 2, negative 2, I'm sorry, are these 2 points a solution to the system? Why or why not? And then move it over to x equals 3. Are those 2 points a solution? What about x equals 1? And so really kind of developing the idea of what a solution to a system is. So there's so many great activities that are ready-made for exploration, and they come with these really handy student activities that students can work through and then kind of guide them to discovering these big ideas. So we really love the Math-Inspired site as well. Okay, I think we're fixing to wrap up. Feel free to ask any kind of last questions. I see a question about do 8th graders have to solve systems. Let me share that particular standard that we were going to. Oops, I missed it, sorry. Here's that new standard, 8.9a, identify and verify the values of x and y that simultaneously satisfy 2 linear equations from the intersection of the graphed equations. So you can see how this activity we're just looking at really does a great job with that, where they're looking at the x and y values that simultaneously satisfy both equations. Where does that happen? So it's a very introductory approach to solving systems of equations, and it's based entirely on the graphs. Okay, there's lots more resources that you'll receive by email as well. Mike's going to lead us through kind of a wrap-up and talk about some other options for going further with learning the TI-Nspire for middle school. You'll also receive by email some of our favorite resources, like some online tutorials, some good books, things like that. But now we're going to kind of hand it back over to Mike and let him share some other opportunities coming up this summer.
Thanks so much, Michelle. So, yeah, we are going to start wrapping things up tonight. If you have any last-minute questions, I know some of you have posted some questions recently here for Michelle or Toni, please feel free to try and use the chat window or the Q&A window. I know they're going to try and get those answered now. As Michelle said, there are a lot of resources that are free, are available to you. One thing I'd like to point you to, let me share my desktop. There we go. Is our website, education.ti.com. And especially if you're new to TI-Nspire, I think this is probably one of my favorite resources. Under the Professional Development tab on our website, scroll down to Online Learning. And on the left-hand side, go down to Tutorials. And what pops up are these TI-Nspire and TI-Nspire CAS Technology Atomic Learning Tutorials. And so we have friends at Atomic Learning that have written short videos to help you use your TI-Nspire to its fullest. And so if I just click on Atomic Learning Tutorials for TI-Nspire handheld, to show you what this looks like. So they're under basics, which I think Toni and Michelle covered a lot of tonight. You can see that a lot of these videos are 2 or 3 minutes long. Again, it's free, so you can pause, rewind, watch again. And then there's all sorts of other stuff that's broken down by application. So there's some things that maybe we didn't talk about tonight that if you want to learn more, you can just watch a short 2 or 3 minute video on it. I really am a big fan of the Atomic Learning Tutorials. Also available on our website, if you go to PD in your area, also under that Professional Development tab, take a look at the T-Cube Summer Workshops. We're really excited about the upcoming summer workshops. And the really cool thing, if you are thinking about TEKS, is if I just scroll down just a little bit on this page, it says implementing the TEKS mathematical process standards with TI-Nspire technology. And so the focus there is middle grades and high school mathematics. And it looks like a 3-day workshop. And with this 3-day workshop, you would get the technology, and you'll get 3 days of really top-notch instruction from a T-Cubed instructor like maybe Michelle or Toni. And it's really, if you thought this 1 hour was worthwhile, imagine 3 days. It's really exceptional. And again, there's other TEKS webinars. Other TEKS summer workshops. And let me take a look at where those are. I believe those are in Texas. That would make sense. There they are. We have El Paso, Fort Worth, Austin, Midland, and Houston. And you can see those dates listed there as well. So registration is live. And again, if you go to our website under professional development and PD in your area, you can take a look at that for more information and also to sign up. We do have some upcoming webinars. We actually have one in a week, 2 weeks. We're getting started with TI-Nspire Plus for grade 8 TEKS. So again, that'll be Michelle and Toni will be with us, and they'll be switching technology over to the TI-Nspire. So please feel free to join us for that. Again, if you have some questions or you're excited about some of the things you saw tonight, please feel free to keep that conversation going. We have a presence on all the major social medias. To get a certificate of attendance, go ahead and click the link in the chat window. That link will direct you to the certificate, which contains the name, date, and duration of tonight's event. The certificate shows additional languages, although it originally does come out in English. Also in a couple of days, I think Eric mentioned this initially, but you will get, probably in a couple of days, you'll get an email, follow-up email that will have a link to the recording. So if you want to listen to this again or any part of it, a link to the documents that Toni and Michelle used tonight, and also a link to the certificate of attendance. So everything you might want to either pass on to someone else or you might want to look at again will be coming your way. Check your inbox in a couple of days. So I think it's time to say thanks. Thank you so much, Toni and Michelle, for all the time that you invested in preparing for tonight's event. I think just judging by the chat window and some of the questions we had some really great interactions, and I really appreciate all the time that both of you invested into tonight's event.
Thank you. We enjoyed it.
Yes, same. And if there's other follow-up questions, feel free to type them into the chat or the Q&A, and we'll be sure to answer those. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. When you leave the webinar, a brief survey will automatically appear in your browser. Your feedback does guide us as we plan future online events, and we really appreciate your thoughts. If there are any skills or resources you'd like us to cover in a future webinar, please let us know. We definitely listen to your feedback, and we really hope you'll share your thoughts in the post-webinar survey. Again, thanks so much, and we hope to see you back online soon. Have a good night.